Have you ever sat by the window, holding a cup of coffee or tea, wondering if it's time to call your child again? Maybe you haven't spoken in months or even years. The silence stretches so long it feels like a wall. And sometimes that silence isn't peaceful, it aches. You wonder if you did the right thing by walking away, or if it's time to patch things up again. You're not alone in this. So many parents, especially later in life, carry these quiet questions in their hearts. After all, we're told that family is forever, that blood is thicker than water, that no matter what happens, you should always reach back out, always forgive, always try. But here's the truth no one says out loud. Sometimes love means not going back. And sometimes the most powerful act of love, for yourself, is choosing peace over pain, even if that means letting go of the ones you gave life to. This video is a heart-to-heart conversation about those moments. The ones where your instinct tells you to reach out, but your spirit hesitates. We're going to talk about 7 signs that, if they show up in your relationship with your child, might mean that reconnection isn't just difficult. It could be harmful to your well-being. You deserve to protect the years you have left, not spend them in emotional survival mode. Let's begin with something many of us know too well. What happens when you're in the middle of an emotional storm and your child simply disappears? You might have been grieving the loss of a spouse, or recovering from surgery. Maybe you were just going through a tough time, loneliness, financial hardship, or anxiety that hit harder than usual. And you reached out, a call, a text, a message asking for company, support, or just to hear their voice. But the silence on the other end wasn't just quiet, it was abandonment. Not a busy schedule or a misunderstanding. Number. This was complete and deliberate distance at the exact moment you needed them most. That's not a misunderstanding, that's a message. When someone walks away while you're falling apart, especially your own child, it carves a hole in your chest that's hard to explain. It's one thing for a friend to forget your birthday. It's another for your child to vanish when your heart is breaking. That kind of emotional absence sends a clear signal. I will only be there for you when it's easy for me. That's not love. That's conditional convenience. If your child has ghosted you in moments when your soul was most fragile, when you truly needed to be held, heard, or simply seen, that isn't a small red flag. That's a breach of basic human care. You don't owe someone another chance to disappear again. Let's talk about something even more subtle, but just as painful. Have you ever been made to feel guilty for wanting connection? You might have reached out and said something like, "I miss you," or "I wish we talked more," or even, "Can you call me sometime this week?" And their response was cold, dismissive. Maybe they rolled their eyes. Maybe they said you were being too needy or dramatic. Maybe they even implied you were emotionally manipulative, just for having the courage to ask for love. This is emotional gaslighting, when your basic human need for closeness is twisted into a flaw. As if wanting to hear from your own child or wanting to feel part of their life is some kind of burden. But let me say something very clearly, especially to you if you've ever felt ashamed for wanting connection. There is nothing wrong with your heart. Wanting warmth, communication, and inclusion is not a weakness. It's the most human thing in the world. When your child accuses you of being too emotional simply because you care, that's not just dismissive. It's cruel. If they shame you for needing what every parent craves, a relationship with their child, that's a sign that reconnection may not be safe for your heart right now. It may only reopen old wounds. And speaking of wounds, have you ever tried to speak your truth to your child and felt punished for it? Maybe you gathered your courage and said, "It hurt when you didn't come to the hospital," or "I feel like you don't want me in your life anymore." And instead of listening, they shut down. They gave you the cold shoulder. They didn't argue, didn't even defend themselves. They just made you feel like you'd done something wrong simply by being honest. This kind of silence is a form of punishment. It's a power play that says, if you express pain, I will withdraw even more. And slowly, it teaches you to stay quiet, to stop asking questions, to stop expressing needs. You tiptoe around them, you shrink yourself. You accept less just to avoid another freeze-out. This isn't a real relationship, it's walking on eggshells. When your child can't even hear how you feel without making you pay for it emotionally. That's not love, that's control. And you don't need to invite that dynamic back into your life, because what starts as one silent treatment can become years of suppressed pain. And at this stage in life, you've already carried more than your share of silence. Sometimes silence is survival. Sometimes not speaking up helped you keep peace in the past. But now is the time to let your truth breathe. And if your child punishes you for that, walking away may be your greatest act of self-respect. So many parents over 60 tell me, "But they're still my child. I still love them." And I know you do. That love never disappears. But love doesn't mean you have to keep reopening the same wound. Love can live in your heart without being allowed back in your life. You're not weak for wanting connection. You're not dramatic for needing support. And you're not a bad parent for drawing a line in the sand and saying, "No more pain." You've lived enough life to know that not all relationships are meant to be fixed. Some are meant to teach you where your boundaries begin. Some are meant to show you that even deep bonds can become harmful if they go unchecked. Now take a breath. Sit with this. Let yourself feel the truth of it, even if it's uncomfortable. Because the truth, as heavy as it can be, is also what sets us free. Let's keep going. There's more we need to talk about. And if any of this is already speaking to something in your heart, stay with me. We're just getting started. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the silence. It's what happens when that silence finally breaks. Maybe after months of not hearing from your child, they suddenly reach out. A text, a message, a voicemail saying something vague like, "Hey, just checking in," or "Hope you're doing okay." And for a moment, your heart leaps. You feel like maybe the door is open again. Maybe this time will be different. But then you look closer. They didn't ask how you were during the surgery. They didn't call when the holidays passed and your table had an empty seat. They show up now, out of nowhere, just when you've started to find some peace. This is one of the most confusing parts of parenting. An adult child with emotional distance. They don't come back because they're ready to repair things. They come back when you've stopped chasing, and that's a sign you cannot ignore. When your child reaches out only after you've pulled away, only when you've stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped asking, it's rarely about love. It's about control. Because now they decide the terms. They're not afraid of losing you. They're afraid of losing the power they once had over your emotions. You see, this isn't about reconnecting. It's about reclaiming. Reclaiming your attention. Reclaiming your energy. Reclaiming the quiet comfort they once had, knowing you'd always be there, no matter how they treated you. This is not a relationship built on mutual care. It's a dynamic that feeds off your hope while starving you of real connection. And I know how tempting it is to reply anyway, to open the door again, to think, maybe they finally came around. Maybe they're ready to talk. But if they only come back when you stop reaching out, you have to ask yourself, where were they when your heart was still open? Real love doesn't wait until you're healing to show up again. Real love stands beside you through the hard parts, not just after. That brings me to something that might hurt even more, but it's one of the clearest signs that you should not reconnect. When your child completely denies the relationship ever mattered. Maybe during an argument or a final goodbye, they said something like, "It was never that serious," or "You're not really part of my life anymore." Or even worse, they told others that you were never that close. And suddenly, everything you held dear, the memories, the laughter, the childhood moments, the holidays, the tears, all of it is treated like it never happened, like it was all in your head. This kind of emotional rewriting is more than painful. It's erasure. It makes you question your own reality. And for many older parents, it's devastating. Because we're not just talking about disagreements here. We're talking about someone acting as if you were never a meaningful part of their life, like you never mattered. This isn't just distancing, this is emotional cruelty. And it's one of the hardest pills to swallow. When someone denies the love you gave, they're telling you, "You were never safe to me." And if that's how they feel, no amount of reaching out, explaining, or waiting will change it. You don't need to re-enter a relationship where your love is treated like a mistake. And I know, especially as we grow older, we reflect more. We want peace. We want to feel like we made a difference in our children's lives. But if they tell you, directly or indirectly, that your presence was meaningless to them, don't go back trying to prove otherwise. Because your worth doesn't depend on whether someone else remembers your love. It lives in the fact that you gave it in the first place. And sometimes we need to love ourselves enough to walk away from people who pretend we never existed. That kind of hurt, being erased, it changes you. It makes you shrink. And that's exactly what I want to talk about next. What happens when you start shrinking just to keep their affection? Maybe you've noticed this in your own life. You don't talk about your feelings anymore because they roll their eyes. You don't bring up the past because it sets them off. You stop calling as often because you're tired of being met with cold replies. You start walking on eggshells, just hoping not to make things worse. And then it happens. You start celebrating crumbs. A text message becomes a victory. A quick happy birthday feels like a breakthrough. An occasional "I miss you" feels like gold. Even though you don't see them, hear from them, or feel any real closeness. This is emotional starvation. And it is one of the most dangerous places to live. Because over time, you start to believe that the bare minimum is all you deserve. That you should be grateful for scraps of attention. That needing more makes you difficult. That being ignored is just how they are. But it's not true. Affection is not a prize you should have to earn by becoming small. Warmth is not something you should be begging for with silence and obedience. You're not a burden for wanting to be loved openly and consistently. And if your child has trained you, whether intentionally or not, to expect less and less just to keep the peace, that is not a relationship built on love. That is a dynamic built on emotional control. This happens more than you'd think, especially to parents who grew up in households where love was tied to performance. If you were taught that love had to be earned, you may not even recognize how much you're sacrificing now just to avoid another shut door. But let me say this clearly, you were not put on this earth to shrink. Not for anyone, not even for your children. Love should not make you disappear. You've lived through too much, overcome too many storms, to spend the rest of your life begging for connection from someone who won't meet you halfway. It's not your job to prove your worth to anyone who refuses to see it. And if you've spent years shrinking, staying silent, making yourself small just to keep them close, it may be time to ask yourself the most important question of all. What would my life look like if I stopped trying to be enough for someone who keeps telling me I'm too much? Because the answer to that question could change everything. Let's take a breath together. All of this may feel like a lot to hold. That's okay. It's heavy because it's real. And sometimes the truth lands hard before it sets us free. You are not too emotional. You are not too sensitive. You are not difficult. You are someone with a heart that's tired of being taken for granted. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. Let's keep this conversation going. There's a quiet kind of grief that comes with parenting adult children who keep you at arm's length. It's not like the grief of death. It's slower, more invisible. It's the ache of being alive and still unseen. The pain of sitting in a room full of people and realizing the person you once held in your arms now treats you like a stranger. But here's something I want you to hold on to, especially if this pain is familiar. That grief is not your fault, and your healing does not depend on their behavior. Because no matter how much you love your child, you cannot keep placing your heart in the hands of someone who doesn't know how to hold it. You see, the avoidant behavior we've been talking about, the ghosting, the gaslighting, the punishing silence, the lack of remorse, the manipulation, it doesn't usually come from nowhere. It often comes from their own wounds, their own unhealed pain. Maybe they had expectations of you that you didn't know about. Maybe they carried resentment they never voiced. Or maybe they've just become so emotionally guarded that they don't even know how to let anyone in. But here's the truth. Their wounds are not your responsibility to fix, especially when fixing them means breaking yourself again and again just to try. One of the hardest signs to accept is this last one, when you realize that reconnecting with your child would mean abandoning yourself. You know what I'm talking about. That feeling in your chest when you think about calling them. That hesitation, that anxiety, that sinking feeling in your stomach before a holiday. The mental rehearsal of what to say, how to act, how to not trigger them. The part of you that says, if I just stay calm, if I don't bring up the past, if I pretend everything's fine, maybe they'll be kind this time. But that's not connection. That's self-erasure. When being in someone's presence makes you distrust your own voice, your own memories, your own needs, that is not love. That's survival mode. And the longer you live in survival mode, the more your spirit starts to dim. You become more withdrawn, more anxious, more confused about what's real, and you start asking dangerous questions like, maybe I am the problem. Maybe I am too much. Maybe I just wasn't a good parent. But stop right there. Because questioning yourself is exactly what this kind of dynamic is built to do. It's meant to wear you down, to make you chase the version of yourself they want you to be. Silent, small, apologetic, and endlessly available. And the moment you say yes to that version again, you abandon the version of you that fought so hard to heal. You didn't spend all these years building yourself back up, after loss, after health scares, after heartbreak, just to hand your peace away to someone who already showed you they couldn't protect it. I know that might feel harsh. I know it's painful to admit that even the people we love most can become unsafe. But love is not enough when it comes at the cost of your mental and emotional well-being. And I also know what you might be thinking, but what if they change? That's a question that lingers for a long time. And the truth is, people can change. But not because you waited, not because you softened yourself, and not because you took them back again and again. They change when they do their own inner work, when they look at their own reflection and decide to take responsibility. And most of the time, that only happens when they realize they've lost something they can't manipulate anymore. That's why choosing not to reconnect isn't an act of punishment. It's an act of clarity. It's saying, I love you, but I refuse to disappear so you can stay comfortable. Sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about letting go with grace. It's about choosing to walk forward without bitterness, without revenge, but with a firm boundary and a soft heart. You're not giving up on them. You're giving back to yourself. And let's be honest, after everything you've survived in this life, Haven't you earned the right to live in peace? To wake up without anxiety hanging over your head? To enjoy your morning coffee without worrying whether you'll say the wrong thing in a text message? You've earned peace. And sometimes peace means no longer opening the door to people who only know how to knock when they need control. There's nothing selfish about that. In fact, it's one of the most courageous things you can do in this chapter of life, to choose your own emotional safety. And if anyone tries to make you feel guilty for that, if they say you're being unforgiving, stubborn, cold-hearted, just remember this. Forgiveness doesn't mean access. Compassion doesn't mean contact. And love doesn't mean suffering. You can forgive someone quietly, without ever speaking to them again. You can send love to their soul, without ever opening that door again. And you can grieve the relationship that could have been, while still choosing the life you deserve to have now. This chapter of your life isn't meant to be filled with chaos and uncertainty. It's meant to be filled with clarity, with ease, with joy that doesn't come with strings attached. You deserve relationships that feel like home, not ones where you have to build the whole house yourself, only to have the door slammed in your face. So let me ask you something, and take your time with this. If you reconnect with your child, what version of yourself will you become? Will you have to shrink again? Will you start questioning your worth again? Will you feel that familiar ache in your chest, walking on eggshells, hoping you won't be rejected again? Or will you stand firm in the version of you that knows what peace feels like now? Because that version of you is precious. She's weathered storms. He's risen from loss. They've rebuilt themselves one quiet, steady day at a time. That version deserves protection. And if protecting that part of yourself means not reconnecting, at least not right now, then so be it. You didn't come this far to go back to what broke you. And if your heart is still aching, still wondering if this is the right decision, let me offer you this gentle reminder. Sometimes closure isn't a conversation, it's a decision. And sometimes healing isn't found in who returns. It's found in who you become when you stop waiting. You are not alone in this. Many people your age are quietly navigating this same terrain. The difference is you're brave enough to name it, to look it in the eye and say, no more. No more shrinking, no more begging, no more proving. Just peace, just presence, just the freedom to be who you are, fully, safely, and without apology. And that, my friend, is not weakness, it's power. You've spent a lifetime learning how to show up for others. As a parent, a friend, a spouse, maybe even a caretaker. You've probably given love in more forms than you can count. Through meals cooked, bills paid, holidays planned, and hundreds of quiet sacrifices no one ever noticed. It's in your nature to care, to reach out, to try again. So it makes sense that the idea of stepping back from your own child feels unnatural, maybe even wrong. But here's what I want you to remember as we close this conversation. Love without boundaries is not love, it's martyrdom. And it leaves no room for healing, yours or theirs. You're not choosing bitterness. You're choosing peace. You're not closing the door forever. You're simply saying, not like this. Not if I have to lose myself to be loved. Some people may never understand that. They may say, but they're your child, as if that bond gives them the right to hurt you without accountability. But those people don't live in your body. They don't carry your memories. They haven't cried the tears you've cried after being met with silence, disrespect, or emotional manipulation. The world likes to talk about unconditional love. But unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional tolerance of harm. There is a difference. You've made it through too many years, too many battles, to spend your days chasing after someone who's already shown you they aren't willing to grow with you. And I know, for many of you watching this, that's not just a painful truth. It's a deeply lonely one. Because letting go doesn't just mean losing the person. It also means letting go of the hope. The idea that one day they'll come back and say everything you've longed to hear. That one day they'll hug you, apologize, call you mom or dad with softness again, and finally see the version of you that's been there all along, steady, patient, loving. It's okay to grieve that hope. In fact, it's necessary. Because only when we grieve the fantasy can we start living in the truth. And the truth is, peace is better than potential. You don't need to keep proving your love through pain. You don't need to wait by the phone, measuring your worth by a text that may never come. You don't need to keep revisiting wounds that never seem to heal. You can stop. You can decide, right here and right now, that your emotional safety matters just as much as anyone else's. And when that voice inside you whispers, "But what if they need me?" I want you to ask a new question. But what if I need me more? Because you do. You need your strength, your dignity, your self-trust. You need mornings without dread, evenings without overthinking, and relationships that fill you up, not drain you. If someone is meant to be in your life, truly meant to walk this path with you, they will meet you with care, with effort, with respect. And if they don't, that is their journey. You do not have to carry it on your back anymore. You've done enough, and you are enough. So if any part of this message has touched your heart, let me say this directly to you. Yes, you watching this right now, wherever you are. You are not a bad parent for needing space. You are not selfish for setting a boundary. You are not weak for saying no more. You are brave. You are healing. And you are allowed to protect your peace. Maybe for the first time in your life, you're realizing that your role as a parent isn't about endless sacrifice. It's about balance. And that balance includes you, your health, your happiness, your heart. It's okay to love someone and still choose distance. It's okay to miss someone and still choose yourself. And it's okay to hope they grow, even while knowing it may have to happen without you. There is no perfect ending to this kind of story. Only the one that brings you the most peace. Maybe one day things will change. Maybe they'll come back different. Maybe they won't. But whether or not that door ever opens again, you will still be standing. Whole, worthy, strong. You don't need to carry the guilt anymore. You don't need to carry the blame. You don't need to carry the silence. You are allowed to be free. And if you've been holding this pain in your chest for years, maybe even decades, and no one ever said this to you before, let me be the first. You are not alone. So many people in your generation, strong, kind, giving souls, are walking through the quiet heartbreak of adult children who've drifted, rejected, or emotionally harmed them. But there is a community of people, right here, right now, who understand, who see you, who know what it's like to love deeply and still have to let go. So if you're feeling emotional right now, that's okay. If you're crying, breathe through it. This is your release, your exhale, the beginning of your next chapter. And you don't have to walk it alone. If this video has spoken to you, leave a comment. Share your thoughts. You never know who might be reading and thinking, I thought I was the only one. And if you found comfort here, consider liking this video and subscribing to Strong Elderly Life, where we talk about the real stuff, things that matter, things that heal, things that remind us we still have so much life, wisdom, and strength within us. Because this isn't the end of the story. It's the start of a new one. Here's to living your truth. Here's to protecting your peace. And here's to the quiet, powerful freedom of letting go with love. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. And you are deeply worthy, just as you are. Take good care of your heart. No one can do it quite like you can.